Commercial's always intrigued me. What's it look like? How do I do it? Where do we go? So I'm hoping that I can answer some of those questions for you today. Who here is with my home group? Pretty much everybody. Awesome. You don't have to be, just kind of gauging my audience here. Also, who here has done commercial transactions before? A few of you. Awesome. Perfect. I love questions. So don't feel, I've got a presentation here, don't feel like we have to stay on it. We don't have to, we can jump all around. So as we go through this, if you find an opportunity to jump into something you really have a question about or something you want to know about commercial, we will talk about it and we will figure it out. We've only got an hour, so we'll try and rush through as much of this as possible. Kind of some of the topics we'll talk about. The basics of commercial, really, one of the big things is terminology and process. Those two things are not the same as they are in residential. So I'll give you some keys on that. We'll talk about cap rates, that's another big thing. Making offers, what that looks like, and again, how that's different in the commercial world. And then, of course, the big question that everyone always wants, how do I make money at it? I've been doing it for over 20 years. I love it. I tell people in the Chandler branch all the time that they're my heroes because you could never get me to do residential in a million years. I would probably go out and put a bullet in my head. So hats off to all of you guys for being awesome at what you do, and hopefully we can add to that repertoire today to give you a little bit more to go with. I have this whole intro thing. I'll screen through this because I know we're short on time. I'm from Arizona. I'm an Arizona native. I am 5th generation Arizonan. I think Batman is the best superhero, or Iron Man, both of them because they're real people, and the superpower is that they're rich. So it's obtainable for anyone. I got my real estate career started in the year 2000. I got my license at the end of 1999. What was happening in 1999?
Y2K.
End of the world. Kind of like right now. End of the world's happening. I don't know why you guys are trying to get into commercial. It's all going to implode. Inflation's at a high. I don't know why we're doing this. Lesson to that is markets always change. Everything always shifts. If you're able to shift with the market and reinvent yourself, you'll always make money. And so my key with that is congratulations for being here and thinking about making money in a different way with commercial. That's the first commercial building I ever did. That was in 2004. It doesn't look that old, but it is. It's an awesome building. I still pass it all the time, and it holds a little special place in my heart. Real estate. I have done every type of transaction I think that is imaginable when it comes to real estate. If it's some sort of lease, if it's some sort of purchase, if it's some sort of land, development, multifamily, retail, you name it. I've only been stumped once in the last 5 years. My home group agent that had a federal land lease that was being purchased and developed down in Maricopa, and I was like, wow, all right, this is a new one. Let's jump into this. So other than that, we've done it all. I need to update these pictures. That's my beautiful wife and our horse Brumby. This is my family. That is an old picture. There's a little bit more updated. We are crazy, they are nuts, and I love them. I love crazy suits. Award winner at my home group. I think I've won pretty much every year that we've been here. Carla's trying to beat me, but don't listen to her. She doesn't know anything. And I have a disease, so I'm just going to put it out there right now. It's called Witzel-Such. My wife calls it Witzel-Dutch. It is a neurological condition where I make puns, sexual comments, and bad jokes at an inappropriate time. So if I say anything offensive to anyone, you're not the first, you won't be the last. And I'm going to apologize, and hopefully we can still be friends after. We are going to skip through that. We're going to jump right into caps and NOIs. Anyone heard those terms before? A few of you. So, this is one of the calls I get a lot from agents. Hey Aaron, I've got this guy who wants to buy an investment property. And of course, all commercial deals feel like they're huge, right? It's a huge deal. I don't want to lose this guy. He's awesome. But he says he needs a 7 cap. What is that? Well, let's talk about it. The first thing I always say when they say, hey, I want a 7 cap, I always go, well, let's back that up a little bit. Let's talk about the NOI. NOI, any guesses on what that means? Not you in the front row. Net operating income. That is where I go first every time with any investor that's looking at commercial. I don't want to talk to them about the cap rate. I don't want to talk to them about their investment goals. I want to talk to them about what are they trying to get out of the property, out of their investment. Think of an NOI as kind of like an ROI. A little bit different, but it'll kind of give you the same context, the same architecture to figure it out.
What is ROI?
ROI is return on investment. And again, that's subjective. Lots of people look at ROIs a little bit differently. NOI is going to be your net operating income.
Will you be able to send these to us?
Absolutely not. This is all proprietary. No, I'm kidding. They have it all. I will send it. Anyone who wants this afterwards, either give me your card, or I can, if everyone just wants it, I can use the sign-in sheet and blankly email it out to all of you. But this is completely shareable, so yes. Multifamily is one of the best ways to talk about NOI just because it has multiple tenants and it's most relatable to residential. But this same formula works on any property. I did a office building that had about 22 tenants in it, and you do the exact same thing. So what you want to look at is, hey, how many units do I have? How much rent am I getting? What does that give me for my gross income on the rent? Then you have to figure out, well, okay, is that real? Is that not? What's my vacancy factor in the building? I don't care who sold you down the Primrose Path, but every building has vacancy. Never hear, listen, if anyone ever tells you, oh no, we're zero vacancy, we've never been. They're full of crap. Every building has vacancy. Building, apartments, everything's got vacancy. So you gotta figure out what that vacancy rate is. There's lots of ways to do that. We won't get into the weeds on that, but we can get you a solid vacancy. If it is something like an office building, it's real easy to see. Ask for the rent roll, ask for the last 24 to 36 months of trailing expenses and incomes. It's all right there. Once you get that, then you also want to throw in any additional income. Anyone that's been in apartments or sold apartments or looked at apartments, you know they have all sorts of little things to get more money to the landlord. Laundry facilities, gym facilities. Sometimes they have cafes on site. I've seen where they have to pay to get into the dog park. All sorts of crazy parking, storage, all sorts of things that are extra income. So you want to make sure all that extra income is accounted for. Then you're going to subtract your fixed expenses. Fixed expenses are going to be property tax, insurance, things that are going to be with the property no matter what, and they're not going to vary very much. Then you get into your operating expenses, and this is where it gets a little bit touch and go on opinions. Some landlords like to include everything in their operating expenses. Some don't like to include much at all. So that goes again for multifamily or for offices, retail. They'll all have a degree of operating expenses. Some will have a property manager, some won't. But that's one thing where it's really easy to get into and see how that will shift that NOI depending on what they're counting in there. And then last but not least, the reserve account. This is something that's kind of gone away over the last few years. I'm interested to see if this is going to come back up given current inflation. A reserve account is basically, hey, we're kind of setting aside a forced savings account for the property. Lots of people, it's like 5%. They're going to put that money aside every year so that when big expenses like reseal coating the parking lot comes up, that's expensive. Depending on the size of the unit, I've seen bills into the $1.5 million range to reseal coat the parking, restripe it, and the whole 9 yards. So they want that money set aside. They want it to be still accounted for as part of the revenue for that, but they don't want to expense it because they haven't expensed it yet. One thing that we talk about when we do negotiations is finding out if there is a reserve account and making sure that if you are representing the buyer, that you get that reserve account. Because guess what? If you don't ask for it, you're not getting it. Kind of like your commissions, and we'll talk about that in a second too. Anyhow, you put all that together, you do your math, you take in all your incomes minus out all your expenses, and that gives you your net operating income. So you can see if we were to just take, in this example, just the rent and the miscellaneous income, we would have been at like $130,000. Now we're at 83. That's a big difference. And some people calculate that cap rate on the gross, not the net. That's why I say, let's talk about your return. What are you looking to get? What's your net operating income that you want to get? Don't tell me a 7 cap, because that can be subjective. How much money are you looking to make each year? Oh, I need to make $83,060. Awesome. I have the perfect property for you. Or a lot of them will say, hey, as long as I can get, I'm going to put $3 million in. If I can get $200,000 a year out of it, I'm going to be solid. Cool. Now I know where my target is, and let's go find that. Little easier than being subjective with the caps, and I'll tell you why. So let's talk about cap rate. So your capitalization rate, that is, you have to have the NOI basically to get to your cap rate. So that's why I talk about the NOI first. All that simple math is that you divide your NOI by the sales price, and that gives you a cap rate. Now you can tell how old this example is that I put together because it says 8.8 cap. You front row burners, have you seen an 8.8 cap lately?
Ooh, all right.
Nope, doesn't exist right now. We are starting to see cap rates come back up, so that's a good indicator of the market. When the markets get very seller oriented, the cap rates come down. When the market gets very buyer, cap rates go up, and we're already starting to see cap rates.
So when did they start going down? I'm curious, like this last couple months, or has it been?
So they've started to raise anecdotally since about June. So that's when we started to see like things start to tick up. Last week I actually saw a 7.5 for like the first time in like years.
Really?
I mean, it's probably been a good solid 3 years. I haven't seen, and a good property, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. Well, let's talk about it. I said we'll jump around. Let's jump around. Let me see how we get there. Okay, right there. Perfect. Next thing. So, like we were just talking about higher caps, right? So now we're seeing caps come up. Higher caps mean a better deal, right?
Generally speaking.
Generally speaking, right. So, and that's kind of the idea that's out there. So people will say, oh, give me that 8 cap. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be solid. Well, as your cap rate goes up, so does your degree of risk. And there's a number of reasons why. Go back here for a second. A number of reasons why. One that I just had come up a few months ago was a warehouse deal. There's a warehouse deal in Phoenix. We're always looking for warehouse and industrial. That market's become very tight. There's not a ton of inventory on the market, and especially depending on your use. So this warehouse deal comes up, and I can't remember the cap exactly, but it was high. It was like in the 8s, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, and it's industrial. We got an 8 cap. We got like 7 years left on the lease. This is an amazing deal. I was like, guys, jump on this, jump on this, jump on this. We'll like sell this today, get it out to everybody. My partner, Nick, was a little bit more cautious than I was. Like, well, let me get the details. So we got the details. Turns out the tenant is at the time was a manufacturer for vaping products. Does anyone realize what happened with the vaping laws in the last year? They were going to be out of business in 3 months. They might have had a 7-year lease, but they were not going to be operating any longer. And hence why the landlord was throwing it out there at a really good cap. And I'm sure someone picked it up and didn't know what was going on in the legislation. And all of a sudden they're going to have an empty building. And an empty building is not a good building. So it's finding out why is that cap there. One example I always say, back in the days when we could get 8 caps, people would be like, I want a 12 cap. I can get you a 12 cap. It's called the Pink Rhino. It's downtown. It's a strip club. They're going to give you a huge cap, but it's going to be super volatile and super risky. Anyone know why? Strip club. They come in, they go out. They have legal issues. They have payment issues. It's a high-risk deal. Flip that paradigm. You want a Starbucks. Anyone know what a Starbucks trades at? 4. 4.2. I mean, that's inflation right now. Like, you're breaking even on your money. But that's the other side of the conversation. People will come to us and say, hey, Aaron, I want a Starbucks. Can you get me a 5 cap? Nope. I have never seen a Starbucks above 4.5. Because why? Starbucks is a very safe tenant. They are going to pay you on time every month till their lease is up without question. And if they didn't, they're going to write you a big check that covers the rest of their lease and they're going to move out. So landlords like Starbucks if they have set it and forget it money, right? We're going to put them in there. I'm never going to have to worry about this building again. Starbucks is going to pay for the repairs. They're going to pay for the upkeep. I'm going to get a check every single month, and if by chance they decide to move out, they're either going to pay me for the whole thing or they're going to keep paying me until that lease is up. Which leads to another conversation of sometimes when people say, well, that building's just vacant. Anyone, that's me. Sorry. Anyone seen a vacant drugstore? Vacant Walgreens, vacant CVS? And people always comment. There's one in Gilbert. I literally get a call on it at least every 3 months. Hey, this store has been vacant for years. Do you think they'll lease it to me? No, they won't. Well, no, but it's just been vacant, and they need, if something's better than nothing. Yeah, that makes sense to you, not to them. Do you know why they're not going to lease it to you? Because Walgreens is still paying the rent. And unless you can pay Walgreens money, they're not going to rent to you. And so everyone comes in and goes, oh, we can get a deal on it. It's been vacant forever. I could pay them like $6,000 a month. Walgreens is paying them $18,000 a month and has been for 5 years. And they're going to do it for another 2 until that lease is up. So they don't care. So those big guaranteed leases are nice, but they're also very, very small return. So where does that put us? Puts us into the general pop if we want to get a decent cap rate. And a decent cap rate right now, honestly, 6.5 to get a light medical mixed use building is awesome. That is a great deal. It's a great mix. You're going to have, a physician or a chiropractor. Maybe there's an accountant in there. We just had one in Mesa that was an attorney. That comes with its own pros and cons. But you've got good tenants at good cap rates. So you're going to get general, regional businesses at a good cap. You want the really high cap, it's going to be something risky or short term. You want the no risk, set it and forget it, it's going to be a low cap. You can also reverse engineer this if you have a cap rate and you want to figure out what the value is. You can divide the NOI by the cap rate to get the value, to set the value on a building. So when we're listing buildings, we'll work it backwards that way and say, hey, here's what your NOI is, here's the cap rate that we suggest to go to market on for a product like this, here's what the value is going to be. So that puts me on a little tangent too. Any questions? I feel like I'm just bulldozing you guys right now.
How do you figure out like the cap rate? Is that based on the market or?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So a lot of that's based on what's happening in the current marketplace. So we'll pull properties, kind of like how you guys run comps, we'll pull properties of like kind and see what they're trading at. So if we have a retail, inline retail building, for instance, we'll pull up other inline retails about that size, about that genre, because there's kind of different classes, A, B, C, D. And we'll say, hey, what are these trading at and where those caps are? For us, kind of being in it every single day, we have a good feel on it to be able to just go, hey, this is a 6 cap, this is a 5.5 cap. But to verify that, if we have a client that's like, hey, I don't know, that seems a little low or a little high, then we can pull the analytics and give it to them and say, hey, look, here's 10 other properties that are either on the market or just traded, and here's what they went at, at this cap rate.
When you're analyzing cap rate too, are you thinking about kind of what cap rate it can generate based upon improvements? So like obviously existing what it is currently, but what you project it to be based on putting like, I'm thinking multifamily, but like 15K a door, 20 a door, and calculating it that route.
Great question. So that's one thing you got to watch and be aware of. So short answer is yes. When the market was gaining back momentum, call it 2011 to 2017, 18, everything was sold on actuals. It was, here's what we're getting, here's what we're spending, here's what the cap is, and here's what we're going to sell it at. What's kind of shifted since about 2018 when multifamily just started to take off, and more primarily in multifamily than anything, it hit since in the last year and a half, 2 years with COVID, has trickled into every other sector of the market, whether it's industrial or office or retail, is that things are getting sold on pro forma. And so multifamily almost without question. If you get a multifamily flyer and you look at it and they're like, oh my gosh, this is a 6 cap. Read the fine print. It's probably on pro forma. It's actuals like 4, but if you put this amount of work into it and do these rehabs and re-rent them at market rates, then you should be at 6. That used to not exist. It became really prominent in multifamily around 2018. It stayed there. It continues to stay there right now. We'll see if that trickles off with the change in the marketplace. But it's since trickled into everything else. So yes, that's something we have to be aware of when we're looking at properties and make sure, are they selling me on actuals or are they selling me on pro forma? Because that's a big deal, right? If your investor's coming in, he's expecting to get a 6 cap, but the actuals are 4, and you didn't do the homework. He might be knocking on your door going, hey, why didn't you do this for me? I got a huge loss here.
I see it go both ways. It's very, you really have to look at the details.
Really what I do on every single deal is we have a couple spreadsheets, nothing crazy, just Excel, but we will retake everything we're ever presented and rebuild it, especially if it's an investment deal. Because they can give you a huge rent roll, right? Let's say you have 60 tenants and you get a 60 tenant rent roll. Well, easy thing to do is just, okay, here's what it totals. All these columns add up. You'd be surprised how many columns don't add up. People are human. They make mistakes. I don't think in my career I've had anyone that's attempted to defraud me. I think that they just got in a hurry and they put in their calculation wrong. Maybe there's some number was off because they missed a cell. I mean, I've done it too. So definitely double check. And we've rebuilt every one we did. The worst one I had to do was about a 24 unit office building, and the landlord wanted extrapolated out for the next 10 years with escalations and expenses, and I ended up with like a 250 page rent roll. Like, it was insane. But at the end of the day, I was also like, that was awesome, like, good job. But that was a lot of late nights and energy drinks. So, but yeah, great question. So watch for those things, because that will shift what you're looking at. So you're trying to verify all that information. Was there another question up here?
How does reserve kind of get into all this? If there's $1 million reserve, like you said earlier, you just take that off the purchase price, or?
So no, it just gets transferred as is. So
nothing
that's
to do with the cap.
Nothing to do with the cap. So that's why it's good to know if there is a reserve there. Like I said, most landlords in the last few years have been able to push those reserves out and not transfer them or have them because the market's been so good. I think those are going to start coming back. But two sides of that story. I ask every time, is there a reserve? And I have it in my standard LOI. If it's there, it gets transferred, and we get an accounting of it, right? So we're going to know if it's there and we want it. And yeah, it doesn't affect the cap, doesn't affect anything. It's already money that's been accounted for and in their numbers. It should be on their side. So I've had anywhere from $60,000 reserves to a couple $100,000 reserves. I've never had anything major, but that's money in your client's pocket. On the flip side, I had a gal call me, this is probably 2018, and she's like, hey, we did this multifamily deal, but now, we've closed and my client's asking me about a reserve. What's a reserve? And I was like, oh no, honey, I hope there's no reserve. And there was like a $24,000 reserve that she didn't account for, didn't ask for, they didn't do. And the client was cool, but he had her pay for some of that reserve, and I can't remember how much of it was. But it's like, look, you made a good chunk of money off this deal, but you didn't look out for me, and you didn't give me my reserve. Like, that money should have been mine. So one of those things to watch for, so you're not writing a check. But definitely always ask for it. That, again, not as common right now, but it could be there. So, cap rates, NOIs, moving on from that. Any questions on those? Moving on through. Let's talk about some terminology. That's one of the biggest things that I find with agents that are trying to break into commercial. They'll say, I just can't get anyone to call me back. Well, they're probably seeing right through you instantly and knowing you're a residential agent and they don't want to talk to you. No offense. I used to do the same thing. It happens. They just know that chances are you don't know what you're doing. They're going to end up doing twice the work, and so they'd rather not split it with you. They're just going to try and find someone else that's going to be a buyer. So don't be offended if you don't get a call back. Keep calling. I always tell my guys call until they either tell you answer the phone or tell you to F off. One of the two is going to happen.
Or go to their office.
Or go to their office.
Yeah.
We've both done that, and both times it actually made things get done. It worked. They thought we were being too aggressive, but it worked. So some of that is the terminology. The quick, easy one that I always say is when they call up, they're like, man, I've been calling this guy trying to set up a showing. Commercial, we don't call it showings. It's tours. I know that sounds trite and like, why does that little thing matter? It's a tell, right? If anyone wants to play the game and get in there, you want to put your best foot forward, all of a sudden you're like, hey, John Johnson, I'm trying to show your building over here on Center. And he's like, oh, residential agent. So, yeah, is it on Lockbox? Oh my God. We call it tours. Hey, we're trying to set up a tour. We're trying to get out there and do some stuff. And the more advanced notice you can give on that, the better. Because there are no lockboxes. Very rarely. There's one company in the East Valley that's pretty solid at putting lockboxes on everything. They're all contractor lockboxes. There's no MLS lockboxes. And they're pretty good about it. So when I call them, I'm 95% sure they've got it on lockbox, which makes my life a little easier for scheduling tours. But everyone else, there's no lockboxes. They're going to meet you there. They're going to show you the building. They're going to tour it with you. They're going to give you a flyer. They're going to talk to you, your client, and possibly the seller, maybe the tenants. So give them some lead time and call them and ask to set up a tour, and don't ask them if there's a lockbox. Going on with the other terminology, we do a lot of leases. Leases really started to take off in 2020. COVID hit, everything shut down for 2 months, and then all of a sudden it was like everyone and their dog wanted to lease a space. And we've been going gangbusters on leases ever since. It was always kind of about 50-50 on leases and acquisitions for us, but in the last 2 years it's been more like 80-20. 80% leases, 20% acquisitions. And some of that is the market, some of that's uncertainty. Now it's inflation, so interest rates, all that changes things. So we're still in a heavy leasing situation. So knowing some of those lease terms is really good. So I kind of picked out the ones that I get the most questions on when I'm talking to people or going through things. One of those is TI. We'll always talk about TI in a lease. Hey, what do you guys have for a TI allowance? Tenant, what do you have available to do your TI? Sometimes we'll get, what is that? Tenant improvements. Not so much leasehold improvements. It's kind of at the turn of the century. Man, that sounds old. The turn of the century, as old as a dinosaur, and in the 2000s we used to call it leasehold all the time, but now it's tenant improvements. When you do your TI, there's two ways to go about that. One is getting some from the landlord. Two is having the tenant. Man, I am on a roll today. Two is having the tenant cover it all. Now, in most cases, the landlords know they're going to give a TI. The cases where it's not as prominent is when they have a turnkey ready suite. So, for instance, if you go into an office space and it is built out for medical and you want to turn it into a yoga studio, there's a 99% chance that landlord's not gonna give you $1 to do that. He's gonna be like, look, we have a really expensive built-out medical suite here. I'm gonna wait for a medical tenant. Thanks for coming and seeing it. We're not gonna do yoga. Vice versa, you go to a retail spot and they've built out a salon suite, another expensive build out, and all of a sudden, and those are hard to find, and all of a sudden you've got this salon suite and you come in and you say, I want to turn it into general office space. You know, I'm a farmer's insurance agent, the exposure's great, and I can have my office here. Chances are the landlord's not going to give you $1 to do that. It's going to be like, look, I have a built out salon suite here. I'm going to hold out for a salon, or Mr. Farmer's Insurance, I really like you. I'll let you do it, but it's going to be on your dime. And then it gets expensive. Flip side of that conversation, you go into a shell space. So shell is just a box, right? It can be industrial, it can be office, it can be retail. There's gray shell, which is pretty much nothing. It's just open frame and a space. Vanilla shell is they've drywalled it, they put a ceiling on it, but that's about it. There's nothing else in it. If it's a shell space, you know the landlord's going to give you some TI, usually a pretty hefty amount of TI. And knowing what that is in each sector is really just kind of a standard practice, knowing the lay of the land and what's going on. For instance, we just took a tenant, a solar company, into a really large industrial space in Tempe. Putting them in there, it was set up as an industrial space, some office, more warehouse. I call those the flex industrial. It's flex industrial. I call those the mullets of real estate because it's business in the front, party in the back. So we were leasing them a mullet. We had it going, and all of a sudden my client was like, hey, what about TI on this? Which we had crossed earlier. We had like 7 cooks in the kitchen on this one. And so we had to readdress it, but it was already built out. It was already set to go. Really all it was things that they wanted. Now it needed carpet, it needed paint and stuff like that. So that was an easy sell to the landlord. But beyond that, the landlord was like, look, it's warehouse. I don't need to do anything else. But we were still able to get them a good solid $10 a square foot, which on a really big space is a good number. Flip that over to an office space we're doing in Scottsdale right now. It's a great office space, and it's pretty much built out, but it's old. And we've got a really high-end tenant coming into this office space. Landlord goes, yeah, you know what? We're gonna give you a good TI allowance, and we're gonna give you $60 a square foot to build this out.
Ooh, it's a lot.
That was great. Our client went, oh, that's awesome, but now we want to do all this. And they got really specific on their design. We're talking foldable walls, like glass booths, like they went like next level. Now they're a really high-end client, so they wanted the next level. It was like, great, that's awesome. We're giving you $60,000 or $60 a square foot, which was like $500 and something thousand that they were getting for TI. What they wanted was taking them to $1 million. And the landlord was like, yeah, great, pay for it out of pocket. So then they went back up their corporate ladder and then came back to us and said, hey, corporate doesn't want to write that check, but we really want that space. How can we do it? Well, it's a negotiating tool like anything else. One, if we want the landlord to front that bill, we got to give them one or both of the following. We either have to give them more time or we got to increase the rate. And you can kind of play with those numbers. You get other spreadsheets that kind of play with, hey, if the rate's this and the TI is this, where's the landlord trickling out on making a return? And ended up coming back, and we took a 7-year lease to a 10-year lease, and we increased the rate at the get-go from $36 a square foot to $37 a square foot to start. And the landlord was like, great, we'll cover your $1 million build out. Tenant's happy. They have a 10-year lease. We're happy. I got an extra 3 years on the deal, and everyone moves on. So it is a negotiating tactic to play with. I've had other landlords that say, you know, hey, or other tenants that come in and go, wow, the landlord's giving us this, and they're paying, you know, $200,000 to build out this space. I'd like a lower rate. Okay, tell the landlord you're going to pay for the TI. Awesome. Tenant pays for the TI. Landlord essentially takes $200,000 off the total term of the lease. Everybody's happy. So you have to think of how does that all add up and how can we use it to negotiate in the deal. One other last quick story on that, we'll move on from TI. I had a yoga studio years ago going into a retail center, and the landlord just would not budge. They were highly qualified, they had a lot of financial backing. They've been in the business for decades, and we kept asking for general stuff, and we just kept hitting a wall with this broker. Like, I could not get a response on this lease. And finally I got her on the phone. I was like, what is going on here? Like, this is a good offer, it's a good term, good tenant. And she's like, well, landlord just doesn't have any money for the TI. And I was like, oh my gosh, well, tell me that. Like, don't make me do your job for you.
Right.
Like, just tell me, landlord doesn't have any money for TI. You obviously saw our financials. My client has it. So they'll do it. But now you got to drop the rate. And because of having to go through all that hassle, I dropped the rate like 1.5 times the TI instead of 1 times, and everyone was happy. So it worked out good, and my client was actually happy. They wanted a lower rate anyway. But that's one of those things. Remember those options out there, and know that not everyone's always thinking the same. And sometimes you gotta give them that little idea for them.
One question on the tail. When a landlord puts out, 100,000, $500,000, whatever the number is. I mean, what if they, stop paying rent or they go bankrupt? I mean, he's just basically screwed out of this money, right?
He's screwed. And so that's one thing to consider with these landlords when you're representing a tenant, or if you're representing the landlord. Know that that's always a risk, right? So landlords are putting up a lot up front. Any typical deal we do, the landlord does not make a return for 2 to 3 years on their money. And that's kind of the standard in the business. If someone's doing a lease, which is why it's really hard to get a short-term lease. People come, I want a 1-year lease. It doesn't exist. Unless you happen to just take the right space at the right time with no brokers and no TI and no attorneys and no anything, you can possibly get a 1-year lease. 2 is a little more doable. Again, depending on the space and what they're doing. 3, you can always get a 3 because the landlord knows they're going to make money on that third year. 5, 6, 7, 10s, landlord's happy they're making money. This one that we're doing with $1 million TI, that landlord's not making money until year 6. So
How long is the lease?
10 years. Wow. So that's why when you're representing the landlord, understanding that with a tenant, like, you don't want to just throw a tenant in there, right? And if you're representing the tenant, you want to give the landlord as much good information about your tenant for them to take the risk on your tenant, because their transactional costs between broker fees, because they pay the whole thing up front. So like that 10-year lease, I don't get paid 6% every year. I get paid 6% when they sign. So when that lease gets signed, I'm making 6% on that 10-year deal. So landlord's paying that money up front. Wow. He's paid his attorneys up front, he's paid his property managers up front, and then if he's doing TI, he's paying his contractors, he's paying the architect. So all of that is front end money. And I've been on both sides of that conversation, right? Representing the tenant and representing the landlord. And so you got to take, each hat off and know who you're fighting for, to make sure that you're putting them in a good spot. When I am, go ahead.
Sorry, what do you for the business went bankrupt? You still have to pay the rest of the 10 years? That's the first year you went bankrupt.
So if you go bankrupt, generally you're filing Chapter 11 or 13, they can't come after you. All commercial deals are recourse. So it doesn't matter if you're buying, selling, leasing, it's full recourse. Most commercial leases have a personal guarantee, unless it's a big corporation. Starbucks will actually do a corporate guarantee because they don't care, because they know they're going to pay it. Your kind of mid-range tenants, like that solar company I just did, they're a local business. They're doing good numbers every year, but they still had the 3 owners of the company sign a personal guarantee, basically saying, hey, if you bankrupt the company, I'm still coming after you personally for the money, which is something you need to advise your clients on if they sign a personal guarantee. Like, look, they will take your house, your car, they'll try to take your kids. Like, it's no joke. They will take everything if you sign this and you go south.
But sometimes they have nothing under their name. You go after them, you get nothing.
And that's the thing, like landlords know, the really interesting thing between 2008 and 2020 was that landlords learned not to go after things where there's no money. So 2008 was really interesting. Going through that, like, and I was in it too. I was like, no, like, you didn't do it. Like, you have to pay. Landlords were so far on the you signed a lease and you have to pay that they went after businesses that they shouldn't have. They knee-jerk reaction. You know, someone was late and they're locking the doors. Like, it went south really fast, which is why you saw ghost towns in commercial. They pushed people out the door. And I also had some situations where landlords were bankrupt too, and then they weren't fixing buildings, and they would actually end up bankrupting tenants because all of a sudden you got 3 AC units out, landlord's not fixing them, and I can't operate my business. I mean, it was a shit show. It was a mess. Like, it was awful. And so landlords and tenants were like this, and it didn't go good for anybody. So when 2020 hit, I kind of went like this, and I was like, oh boy. Like, I hope everyone learned their lesson, and I hope we can all play nice, and we can figure this out. And it was awesome. We only lost one tenant, because you can build relationships, and you have these tenants for years. I only lost one tenant through COVID. Eviction-wise, bankruptcy-wise, one tenant, because landlords and tenants work together. We abated rent, we pushed rent to the end, we had half rents, we had, hey, if you get PPP, then you're gonna give this to me, and I'm gonna give this to you. Like, it was so copacetic, it was amazing. I had one friend of mine who worked for a really big leasing company. They managed retail, and he had 1,500 tenants, and he only lost one as well. So it wasn't as dire straits as it was before. And I think and part of that was landlords learned, like, I can go after someone and try and get blood from Returna, but it's not going to work. Now, if it's, you know, Joe Blow with the yoga studio, chances are they're not going to go after them. But if it's the solar company I just signed, they're going to go after them. They know they've got assets, and they know the guys have money. And you're given full financial statements when you do this stuff anyway. So, so yeah, the landlords are putting out quite a bit, fronting on that. And tenants sometimes too, right? I had a tenant do a huge TI build out and then hit some dire straits. Landlord was awesome though, worked with them, was like, look, I'm gonna give you some more time, we're gonna make this work. The biggest thing is communication. And I tell my clients that all the time, like, just get on the phone with the property manager or the landlord and communicate. As long as you communicate, everyone's willing to work together. It's when you put up a wall and you're like, oh, I don't wanna tell them what's going on, that's when things go south. And on that note with TIs, I always tell my tenants, and I tell my landlords the same thing, but just flip the conversation. Get as much as you can on the lease when you sign it, because you never know what's going to happen down the road. And what I mean by that is most landlords are going to give you some free time on the rent to get your business up and running, give you some runway. They're going to give you some TI, and there might be some other things that they're willing to do on the building or aesthetically and whatnot for the building. But if you're only going to give them a 3-year lease, as we just discussed, they don't have a whole lot of room to play with. They're like, dude, I got nothing for you. You give them a 7-year lease, all of a sudden the landlord's like, oh, okay, I got a 7-year deal. I'm going to give you $100,000 in TI. I'm going to give you 6 months free, and let's make this work.
Abated.
Good old abated. Yeah, it's not free, abated. Good catch. So that, I tell the tenants that because everyone's always afraid to sign the long-term lease, right? Oh, but what if I'm not here for 5 years? And more so, what if I have to what if I grow and I don't fit in the space anymore? What if my demographic shifts and I have to move across town? All viable concerns. But there's outs that we can use. One big one that's super easy and super cheap is sublease. If you built out a really nice space and you put it out for sublease, chances are it's going to be under market when you do it. Those are really easy to get done. And they're going to be at less time. You signed a 7-year, you've been in there 3, now someone can come into a built out space at 4. They don't have to do TI, they don't have to do any of that stuff. So subleases are great. And every lease we do has a sublease clause in it. You can go to landlord, property manager, and negotiate termination. I've got one company, I've negotiated 3 terminations for them so that they can move in other places in town because their workforce has shifted. So you can negotiate a termination. They've got deep pockets, so that works for them rather than a sublease. They just want to cut bait and move on. But there's options. The thing that they would never get, though, if they didn't sign that longer term lease, is the abated rent, and they wouldn't get the TI allowance. And so now they've left that on the table, and now a lot of my clients that are afraid to do that, all of a sudden, you know, it comes lease renewal time, they're like, man, I can't believe it's been 5 years already. I'm so glad that we did that. Or vice versa, oh man, I can't believe it's 3 years already. I really should have got that abated rent, and they could have had the landlord cover that TI because I'm going to sign another 5 years. It's been great. So always get as much as you can on the deal up front. And I tell, you know, flipping that to the landlords, I say the same thing. Hey, Mr. Landlord, get that time and give them everything you can because you get that time, and you're going to have someone in here longer. Turnover costs are expensive. Transactional costs are expensive. And one of the biggest things that creates value on real estate, which is my favorite thing about commercial, is the lease. You have a longer term lease, it creates more value. And so that creates the equity in your property at a much higher rate. So for me, I'm like, get the time.
Do the rents increase over years usually?
They do. So we're seeing a shift in that right now too. For pretty standard, office was 50 cents on the rent per year. So if you're paying $20 a square foot, next year you're going to pay $20.50. Next year you're going to pay $21. Industrial and retail were pretty solid at 3% annual increases. We've started to see those push to 4% and 75 cents inflation. We knew it was coming. Sometimes in industrial, it trails the CPI, and so they'll tie it directly to the CPI, which honestly is not a bad thing in my opinion. That's fair for everyone. Landlord knows they're getting covered. Tenant knows they're not way over market or way under market. They're just, hey, we're right at CPI, and we're not worried about it.
Are you still seeing a lot of letters of intent or not anymore?
That's how we do everything. So that's a great question. People always say, what's a letter of intent, or what's this letter? And I'll have agents that call me and say, hey Aaron, I need a letter of intent. Okay, for what? You know, every letter is different. It depends on what you're doing. And sometimes I start asking them a ton of questions and then they get offended. I'll just download something off the internet. Please don't do that. No. Every letter of intent's different. Every state's different. All of a sudden you're going to get something for Wisconsin. You're going to have some weird clause in there that you need to know how much cheese they're making on the property, and it's going to get weird. So let us help you. We're here to help. But yeah, letters of intent are how we do everything, whether it's a lease or a purchase. We do a letter of intent. Let me see, I've got one in here. Talk about those and where all the properties are hiding that you guys can't see.
Sellers and landlords will get upset if you bring out the terms later in the lease that weren't in the letter of intent.
Yeah, and they don't want an offer right off the bat, because why? I don't have a standard purchase contract. So that's another thing. Hey, I need a purchase contract. For what? No, for a commercial building. What kind of commercial building? I don't know. My friend wants to buy this building over here. Okay, that's not going to work. Let's slow it down. Let's back it up, because the purchase contract for an industrial building is 100% different than a purchase contract for a multifamily, which is different from an office, which is different from land, which is different from, they're all different, which is why there's no boilerplate, because everything's property specific. But they don't want a purchase offer right off the bat, because our purchase offers tend to be about 30 to 60 pages. They're not that boilerplate. So they don't, no one wants to be trading back 30 to 60 pages every time with terms in it. So we do a quick letter of intent. So this is an example of one that was an industrial spot down in Chandler. We did a letter of intent on. So this gives you an outline of basic details of what we would do in this case for a tenant. You're outlining, who the tenant is, what they want, what term they're looking for. This one was 91 months. Commencement date, rate, you can see the abated in there. We were negotiating about 7 months of abated rent, and then tenant improvements. Hey, here's exactly what we want. Here's what you're going to give us. fixturation periods, use, and one of the most important things in that letter of intent, right down here, your commission. You kind of mentioned that real quick earlier, that we don't have MLS. What guarantees you guys commission? MLS, that property being an MLS, right? It says, hey, we're gonna pay you 3%. I guess I got down to like 1.5% or something crazy. You guys were hurting each other out there. For us, we negotiate that right in the middle. So there's certain things that don't apply in commercial. The one that I love to share with everybody that blows all the residential minds is fair housing. Why doesn't fair housing apply to me?
You're
It's not a house. It's not a house. Guess what? Landlords can be as racist as they want to be, and there's nothing against it. Now, you can tell them unethically, I'm not going to work with you because that doesn't work for me. But they can say, I don't like this business, I don't like this person, I don't like anything about this, I'm not doing the deal. And they can.
They do apply to multifamily.
Multifamily on the leasing side, yes, absolutely. Because now it's what? Housing. Yep. So, but if I'm doing an industrial building, no fair housing whatsoever. The only thing that you really need to watch for in commercial is ADA. Anyone know what that covers? Disabilities. So you better make sure your parking has handicap stalls, you better make sure there's ramps, you better make sure there's handrails, you better make sure that bathroom's got a 5.5 foot turning radius in it for a wheelchair. Other than that, none of that other stuff applies. So, with that, commissions don't apply. I've had a number of agents cry at my phone or my doorstep because they didn't get paid on a deal when it was all said and done. And I go, well, did you negotiate it? No, I didn't think so. I thought they would just pay me 3%. Sorry, sweetheart, that's not how this is going to work. You have to negotiate it. And it's a chip that gets played like anything else in a deal. And there's goods and bads about that. One, you know what everybody's making. And two, sometimes you can negotiate yourself a pretty dang good commission. So I love it because it's right up front. You know, when I call another broker on the other line, usually my conversation goes, hey, good to talk to you again, because it's a really small sandbox. There's about 3,000 of us in the valley. There's not a lot. So I always tell my people, especially when you rub the wrong way with someone on a deal, play nice, bury the hatchet, because you're going to see them again. It's a small sandbox. And if it gets completely stupid, I'll call someone and I'll call them out and I'll talk to their broker. Like, I have no problem with that. I've only had to do that a couple times. Most guys are pretty nice. Commercial's pretty straightforward. So I call them up, hey, how's it going? Good to talk to you again. Hey, I'm calling about your property here on Douglas. Is this still available? Because guess what? Commercial brokers are horrible about updating their listings. 99 times out of 10, it's not available if you found it on the internet somewhere. If you find it on CoStar, okay, it's going to most likely be available. If you found it on LoopNet, you got a 40-60 chance it's available. Because there's no regulation, again, no MLS. There's nothing that says they have to update it. The other classic one is signs. They'll always be like, oh, I saw all these signs. Yeah, those signs will stay up for 10 years. They never take those signs down. Because they're just trying to generate more calls, more leads.
What about Crexie?
Crexie's pretty good. So it still has the same problems as LoopNet. It's not fully updated all the time. So always call and see if it's available. Even if I'm just thinking about a property, I'll just shoot the broker a quick email and be like, hey, is it available? Let me know.
How do you decide what percentage you start at when you are negotiating for yourself?
Good question. So kind of standard practices again, just kind of knowing where the market is for certain different deals. So there's two different things that are kind of working parallel of each other. One is the type of commercial deal that it is. So if it's office, for instance, and I'm doing a lease, I know I'm asking for 6% on my side. If it's a retail space for lease, I'm doing like 3 or 4. I'm going to ask for 4, sometimes 5, and it'll probably get chopped down. But chances are right now it's 3 or 4 because retail's gone up a lot and they don't have a whole lot of vacancies. So kind of the same thing, downward pressure on commissions because they don't have to work very hard to get it filled. Industrial, before the big industrial boom of 2019, I was getting 8% one side. Like, it was awesome. Now industrial's like 3 and 4. Again, just because they're high on the hog and they don't have to work hard to get anyone in there. Most of our sales, pretty traditional, 3% one side. If it's something with a lot of hair on it, we can get 4. But that also comes down on a scale. So that's the other part that works with what type is it for your commission, and then also how much is it. So like on a 10-year lease deal, like that one I was telling you about that we're doing with the big TI, they're paying me 6% for years 1 through 5. And then from years 5 to 10, they're paying me 2.5. So it drops down, but that's pretty standard practice for a long-term lease. It'd be hard for them to pay me 6% over the whole term.
Do you also do buyer broker?
That is something we just talked about in our meeting yesterday. We do. I've been really bad at it, and it's bit us in the ass this last couple months. So we're getting back in the habit of doing much more on our buyer broker. If sales, pretty much always. Leases, I've been really bad at it, but I've been pushing now, saying, "Hey, we got to get back on this." And that was my fault for dropping the ball on that.
So this is about leasing. What if my client wants to buy a piece of commercial property?
What kind?
They were thinking about buying a commercial property. Where can I find all this?
So that is right here. So that's one thing that everyone always goes, "There's nothing on MLS. There's nothing on MLS." CoStar, LoopNet, and Crexi. We have a CoStar account with my home group. If you want to get on CoStar, please contact me and we'll get you set up. It is expensive. It's $380 a month to get on there. So it is a definite pay-to-play system, but it has a ton of analytics and a ton of information. LoopNet, I relate LoopNet to Zillow. It's our Zillow. It's not always accurate, and it's a pay-to-play too. So if you go there and you click on a property 3 times, then you go back to see it a 4th time and it disappeared, well, guess what? They want you to pay to see it. And they've told us that straight out, and they've told us that they pull different information from CoStar, so a lot of those properties just aren't available. Like I said, only about 40% of what you see on LoopNet is actually either available for lease or for sale. Crexi's pretty good. It just hasn't had much of a huge broker following yet because it is broker centric. It's wherever they decide to put it. We try and put a number of ours in MLS. We don't always do great at that, but we have done better at it, and we've actually had a few sales from it, so it's actually been pretty good. But just to give you a quick idea, like on MLS, you guys, this is old, but it's pretty standard. 416 properties available for sale on MLS, and on CoStar there was 4,297. And then leases, there was 327 for lease on MLS, and on CoStar we had 5,369 with 12,000 spaces. So quite a big difference when you're looking for properties. It is hard to jump down and bite off $380 a month if you're not doing it full time and you don't have a good pipeline. So partner with one of the commercial brokers. We've got, I think, 13, 14 now at my home group. Call me up. I can partner you up with someone that can do the searches for you, help you walk through the process, make sure you write your LOI right, make sure you get that commission. Oh, on that commission real quick. The higher price, the lower the commission. So don't think because you do a $20 million deal, you're going to get 3%. Not going to happen. Usually, and it shifts again with market and where things go. Usually at about 5 million, we're seeing it cut down to 2. Usually at about 10 million, it's getting cut down to 1. And it's usually about 1% from there on out. But again, you get to negotiate it, and you get to pull whatever you can in on it. And if you do really good with your client, you can always, they know, especially clients that are playing at that level, they know commissions are a chip to play and negotiate, and it changes their numbers. I did a deal with a client, did a $19 million deal a few years ago, and it went perfectly, it went smooth. We only had, I think it was a 1.15% commission on it. And then at the end of the day, he was like, "Hey, Dutch, that was awesome. I know you worked your tail off on this. I'm going to give you a 1/4 point bonus at the end." those are awesome clients to have, because a quarter point on 19 million goes a long way. That was awesome.
What's the range of multifamily units, like over and above 20, 30, 50, 100?
So
Space.
I'll let Carla talk a little bit more about that in her multifamily class, but just real briefly, if it's under like 5 units, go to MLS.
Right,
If it's above 5 units, go to CoStar.
okay. I wasn't sure if it was still in that low range.
Yeah, it's still pretty low. You'll find some on CoStar that are 3s and 4s. Not
No, I didn't
many.
mean even that low. Low is, to me, is still like the 5 to 20 space.
Yeah, most of that's going to be CoStar. You'll find an 8, from time to time on MLS, but CoStar's where to go.
My understanding, I have zero experience in this arena. 2 questions. In a retail lease, would it be normal that there's an increasing rental rate year after year?
Yep.
Okay. Second question is, I know the pandemic and the economy in general have certainly contributed to it, but how much, if any, have increasing rental rates contributed to vacancy rates?
Well, the crazy thing is our vacancy in retail is at an all-time low. Like, it went gangbusters after 2020. It sat still for about 2 months, and then it went crazy. So anyone that's experiencing high vacancies, it's a landlord management issue. Prime example, anyone know Val Vista Lakes in Gilbert? Love Val Vista Lakes, always been one of my favorite neighborhoods. There is on the south, I'm going to throw this landlord under a bus because he and I have never gotten along. There's a complex on the southeast corner of Val Vista and Baseline. There's a Taco Bell there. There's this beautiful facing the lake place. Has anyone been in there in the last year?
Not last year,
No.
but, yeah.
It's ghost town. There's 110.
Which lake, I'm sorry?
Val Vista Lakes. There was a Fry's there. It is pretty bad when you get Fry's to leave. When there's no other grocery store besides AJ's within like 2 miles. Fry's left. This landlord has, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of square feet, and it's vacant because he sucks. That's it.
How long do you own it?
And he's owned it for like 20 years.
It's
So
always been, yeah, you can tell, it's always been weird.
It's always
Why
weird.
is it so?
yeah, and I call him back, Alan. Like, I've tried to do so many deals with him because I have great clients that want to be in. That's a solid demographic. I mean, you got AJ's, you got Dana Park, you got Dana Landing. You have everything around there is flourishing, and you got one thing that's dead. All of a management issue. So yeah, like retail's going through the roof. The problem with that is rates have gotten really high. So if you try and do, like, we have a lot of drive-through clients. 1, drive-throughs are hard to find. 2, those rates are starting in the 40s now. So when you have a $45 base rent and a $9 triple net on top of that for a space, that is a heavy expense to cover. So I'm interested to see how this trickles out with inflation with the retail rates. The big one that's going to be the weird one out there is going to be office space coming up next year. That was a little bit of a misnomer too after COVID, just because, as we talked, commercial is recourse. So everyone kept paying for their office space. Well, that's going to start coming up here this next year.
As in, there's gonna be a crunch for office space again?
We're going to see a lot of vacancy. The
Oh.
big footprints are going to become vacant. Now, what happened is the little footprints went away. If you try and find 5,000 square feet and under in Surprise or Gilbert, good luck. It doesn't exist. It is all leased up because everyone went to work from home. And then everyone went, oh my gosh, my family's driving me freaking crazy. I need an office space. And they went back to corporate, and corporate said, okay, we'll lease a little satellite space here. And all the people that thought they had to be, in the Biltmore to do financial work realized, hey, I'm working at home. I don't have to drive to the Biltmore. I can just drive 5 minutes from my house. So all that office space disappeared. Doesn't exist. Now downtown, Biltmore, those places you can find some office space, but rates are still holding on, and it's the big footprints now that we're going to see where those go. I've already had 2 of my clients with like 18,000 and 15,000 square feet, put them up for sublease, and there's no takers. No one wants that big space anymore. So that's gonna be a real interesting one to watch.
Is there any talk of like converting those, or what's that like to convert to like residential?
It's hard because of density. So for instance, at Biltmore, there's 3 big office buildings right on the lake there that are owned by the same company. They've been working for 2 years to turn that into apartments, and they can't get traction with the city on the zoning. So it's there, it would be easy to gut and refurbish, but the city won't give them the green light because of the density, parking, all that stuff. Office space doesn't carry as much parking as multifamily.
Here, we're cruising right through break.
Hey, no, I got questions. We're answering questions.
People are engaged.
Prospecting, where are you getting your sellers, your buyers, that type of thing?
So 2 things that work really good with that. One, do the same stuff you're doing in residential, just shift it to business. So if you're farming an area, if you're flyering an area, if you're door knocking, any of those things, I used to do the exact same thing. You go knock on a business, hey, and there's data for all this. I see your lease is coming up. Do you have a broker? I see your building hasn't traded in 5 years. You've got a lot of equity. Would you like to sell? So you can farm the same way, just getting data from different sources. The one that I'd like to do is I network. You work with a CPA, guess what? They know a lot of business owners. You work with an insurance agent, guess what? They know a lot of business owners. You work with a doctor, they know a lot of other doctors. So you work with the people inside your sphere that already have businesses and they know other businesses. And so I always work that networking situation to go, hey, it was really awesome doing this deal with you. Who else do you have your friends do you know that are needing to move their business? And if you've got one person in a sector that's growing, chances are their colleagues are growing too and they need more space. Or vice versa, you have one sector that's demising, their colleagues are demising too. So you go through and you just start working those referrals. So I love that more than the door knocking and the cold calling, which I have definitely done. It definitely works. But now my network business has built itself so much that I almost don't even network it anymore.
Is there like a certain title company that will give you that information? Or
Pretty much all of them.
All of them?
There's 2 really good commercial ones. What's the one that just came to us? I can't remember. First Integrity has a really good commercial program, and then Premier Title has a really, really good commercial program. Those are my two favorites.
Thank you.
What was the first one?
First Integrity.
It's Debbie. Where is she?
All right. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Oh, and a reminder, if you haven't signed in, please take a minute and do so that we can send you the presentations.